Top interviewers of Reddit. What is the worst answer someone gave you? Story 1 asked an interviewee about his tech experience. I helped my mom set up her new iPad, and she's like, your age was in my mid-30s at the time, Sai. Story 2, I worked in the daycare at a gym, and one of the interview questions was, what is the nicest thing you've ever done for someone? One interviewee said providing a false alibi to the police for my boyfriend. Story 3, hey Race, a really bad answer I gave. I applied to work at a candle shop at a mall. The guy who took my resume said they might need someone and started the interview. Why do you want to work here? Truth is, didn't want to leave my job at the time, but I was looking for something closer to home. For some reason, I didn't want to say any version of that. I just said, it smells really great in here. Story 4, instead of asking me to repeat the question that they had misheard, they tried to pry my clipboard out of my hands so that they could read it. And when I didn't let them take the clipboard, they tried to walk around to my side of the table to read it over my shoulder. Without explaining this to me until I was ending the interview moments later. Story 5, why did you leave your last company, sir? I'm not going to lie, I was fired for fighting a customer in the parking lot. Nice honesty, but Edit went to bed with 38 points and a couple of comments and woke up with 14, 8K, and 91 messages in my inbox. I did not hire him, but did respect him for this honesty. I told him the truth as well. So while I didn't ask if you want a missed opportunity on my part, I did get some of the details. This was when I was a young, hot shop manager at the coolest froyo shop in town. It was a family-friendly customer service type of business, and the job was for a cashier customer service position. Said individual was in that too much experience and also too much of the wrong type, mostly seedy smoke shops area. He also had a criminal record. I am a fair individual and understand that a lot of customers are complete dicks. I've worked my share of retail jobs. The fighting question was not a customer attacking him. My first tip-off was him saying, I got into a fight, not a customer attacked. May was being robbed. Customer provoked me to fight tech. When asked for more details, it was with a customer he had verbal disagreements with previously, and he followed the customer to their car with what sounded like intent to fight him. He understood that was the not right way to handle their disagreement, but from my perspective, that is a no-go when there are 20 other people who haven't fought customers applying. I too would be fine hiring someone if they defended someone else, got attacked and responded, etc. To those asking if you should have lied from a manager's perspective, I always prefer people tell the truth since that helps me in making a hiring decision, either in respecting the applicant or knowing I do not need to hire them. My advice is to not volunteer information. It isn't the same as lying. In his case, I did ask why he left, and I would say obfuscate the truth, much like when people ask about your greatest weakness, or if you have problems with your last manager, do not answer this honestly if you had problems. Story 6, there was an interview that happened recently in my workplace. The interviewer asked the interviewee to elaborate on a part of his resume, to which the interviewee replied, my resume was written by a professional, and I'm not actually sure what he means by that part, just know. Story 7 asked an interviewee to tell me about a time they'd built relationships with colleagues, departments, suppliers, etc. She proceeded to tell me how she'd started having an affair with a work colleague. Not quite the answer I was expecting. Story 8, me, tell us about your educational background. Interviewee, I have a degree in philosophy, so I'm probably useless to you and your unenlightened being. Me in my head, WTF. Story 9, interviewer, describe yourself in 3 words. The guy stutters, really struggling. Interviewer, okay, if I asked your closest friends how they would describe you, what do you think they'd say? He stutters more and just blurts out, Welsh. Story 10, me, so, why do you want to work with us? Him, yes, Edit, I was talking really clear, but he was extremely nervous. He later explained he had imagined the interview with a set of questions which he remembered in order. Not the sharpest guy. Story 11, my fiancée is a recruiter for bank tellers. She gets lots of people who don't quite understand the purpose of interviews. She had one that went like this, or why did you leave your last job? Applicant, I hated that place, and the customers were really shitty. Her, okay. Did you give your employer a notice before leaving? And I just stopped going. I really hated it there. So what makes you think you'd be a good fit for company? I guess I live pretty close by. The interview ended shortly after that, obviously. Please don't talk bad about anybody during an interview. Not a good look. Story 12, not me, but a buddy of mine interviewed someone for a job. At the end, he asked, so, do you have any questions for me? The interviewee says no, but check this out, pulls pant leg up to show new tattoo. Story 13, I was interviewing a guy for a job as mall security. I asked the standard interview question, what is your biggest weakness? He responded with weakness, and then nearly maniacal laughter that lasted uncomfortably long. I jumped to the last question and ended the interview early. The guy creeped me out. Edit 1, okay. This interview was nearly 20 years ago and not in HR. At the time, I was a security supervisor, so I was forced to use the questions approved by our corporate HR. I did point out that I also hate this question. I never understood what I was supposed to get from the answers to this question. I was allowed to ask job-specific questions once I went through the approved list, and those were what I actually used to determine whether or not to hire someone along with application, etc. Edit 2, as a matter of fact, the candidate did look a lot like Dwight Schrute. Edit 3, no, the guy did not get the job. Story 14, I helped interview some people once for a government job in an international center in rural Japan. This was a job where foreigners who didn't speak Japanese would occasionally come in and talk to staff. So even though the staff didn't have to be perfect at English, they had to at least be able to understand the basics. In the interviews, my boss had me start out by asking the participants simple questions like, what's your name, and how are you feeling today, to see how they would react. The point wasn't to test their ability, but just to make sure they would be able to handle an unexpected situation where a foreigner was speaking to them in English. And it was horrible. The first guy who came in just stared at the floor for about 2 minutes without saying anything. One girl started to actually cry a little bit. Of course, since this was the beginning of the interview, it threw them off for the rest of it as well. I felt like a total, but on the other hand, if you cry when someone speaks English to you, you're probably not the best pick for the job. Story 15, so a guy turns up 20 minutes late for the interview. No ringing to let us know he was running late, no apology when he eventually turned up, and no reason given. So we get through the interview and eventually ask what qualities do you have that makes you think you're suited to this job. His reply, I'm always on time. Edit, a few people have commented asking if maybe he thought he was early and got the time wrong. No, he hadn't. We got a lot of people who just applied for the job, so it looked like they were trying to get a job to carry on claiming benefits. So we got a lot of no-shows. So we never really rang people coming for interviews to see if they were still coming or anything. Let me say he turns up and hands me his email he has printed that shows me he has an interview and the time, the ones we send out after the phone call. So they have it written down. I then said to him, I had almost given up on you. Did you get stuck in traffic? And was met with a blank stare. The guy was nervous, clearly nervous, so I took him in to be interviewed. His nerves seemed to settle in the interview. He didn't give the best answers throughout, but that one about being on time, I almost burst out laughing there. And then, story 16, it wasn't an interview, didn't get that far, but the job application, it was a dog walking position for a pet company, and we have a question asking about experience. Now, obviously this means experience working with handling dogs, but someone answered like this, I've been walking almost my entire life. Story 17, everyone makes mistakes, right? Tell me about a mistake you made at a past job, what the results were, and how you rectified it. 20-something went on to tell me about getting suckered into selling meth to make more money, then got several coworkers hooked on it, then started distributing large amounts to her team on the reg, then got fired and became a prostitute to support her habit, then landing in jail for solicitation, possession with intent, and resisting arrest. She was newly released from jail and wanted to hurry the interview because she was on her way to a house party with all her old coworkers. I asked point blank if she was holding, and she said, not yet, with a wink. Story 18, not an interviewer, but a coworker told me about a guy they interviewed once who seemed perfect for the role. Until coworkers so. We're a small team and help each other with whatever needs doing. Sometimes includes handling different equipment across sections. Sometimes we just need an extra hand to wipe the benches and sweep. Do you have any issues with expanding your role and assisting with a variety of tasks? Guy, of course not. I'm happy to help out wherever I'm needed, and any chance to do something new is a chance to learn and gain skills. It'll certainly assist in any task, except cleaning, of course, that's women's work. Coworker. To emphasize, my coworker and the other person doing the interview were both women, and this wasn't the guy's bad attempt at humor. He was 100% serious in his answer. He did not get the job. Edit, to be clear, this was all in the job description, and it was considered paid work. The job was a starting position with the expectation of on-the-job training and advancement, but not all the work involved was glamorous. The question was making sure he understood that. Story 19, interviewing a woman for a casino cashier position. Me, how much money would you feel comfortable handling on a daily basis? Her, none. I don't want to go to jail. Story 20, RN here, doing group peer interviews with a candidate that came across to me a little self-sure. We asked a few clinical questions, and one went along the lines of, do you know what to do when X, Y? The candidate responded to the person asking the question with, yeah. She did not get the job. Story 21, interviewing for a free clinic for homeless people. We asked about their experiences with the homeless, and this person told us a story of the time, their family vacation on a yacht in Fiji, and then met a fisherman who traded them his entire day's catch for a handful of M&Ms. I was flabbergasted. You couldn't possibly be more out of touch. That fisherman probably wasn't even homeless. And also, why didn't they just give him their M&Ms without taking his hard-earned fish or pay him for the fish? Needless to say, they did not get the job. Story 22 was phone interviewing someone for a technical position. I could hear him tapping away on a keyboard, likely trying to Google the answer. Every time I asked him while he meandered around the answer, The sad part was he wasn't even able to search for the right thing more than once. Edit some context. The questions were pretty basic, related to the technology stack we were interviewing for. The dude had an extremely impressive resume, and it became evident during the call that most of it was less than truthful. There have been a few other winners. This was most recent. Story 23. She talked about using drugs on a cruise she went on. She harassed me for months after and claimed I was racist because I wouldn't hire her. Tried to call my boss, and then his boss. She was lovely. Story 24. Me. So, what interested you in the position? Candidate, do you know how hard it is to lift a dead body? The position was for a part-time cashier. Story 25. Not an interviewer. But years ago, my husband used Google to find something during an interview ad, while his screen was projected onto the wall in front of the interviewers, interviewing a nervous person for their first job. The question is, what role do you typically play on a team? Candidate, defense me. This is an interesting response. Can you tell me more about that? Candidate, I hate sports and don't want to have to touch the ball. It was definitely a memorable answer. Story 26. Tell us why you left your last job. It was boring. I didn't like it, so I started calling in slick. Yeah, telling my boss I was sick, but I really just didn't want to come to work. Story 27. Me. It says in your skills you're a pickup artist. Can you explain how that's relevant to the position that you're applying for? PUA. Oh, that means I'm getting really good at banging sluts. So I'm totally a great salesman. For myself, he was being interviewed for a customer service role by two women. So no, he wasn't. Story 28. I asked her to describe a time when she had to complete a repetitive task and how she stayed motivated. Her answer was waking up every morning. I asked how she stayed motivated, and she said she didn't have to because her mom got her up. Story 29. Q. Tell me about a time you helped someone else. A proceeds to tell me a story whereby his negligence directly lead to his grandfather's death. Best part, my manager still hired the tool. Story 30. Me. Is there anything in your past that could prevent you from passing the background check? Candidate, well, last week I got arrested for domestic dispute because my wife put her hands in my face, so I bit her finger off. Me. Silence. Story 31. Way away, too late to this party. But do I have one? A few years ago, we put out an app for a senior software developer. The description was rather broad. We had a variety of projects we could stick them on, but needed a senior level person that could jump in relatively quickly. In comes this lady, let's name her Susan, with an excellent resume. 10 years of development experience, lead level previous position. Listed proficiencies in all the languages we wanted, even obscure ones with the still knows XSLT, for example. So we bring her for an interview, one of those public sector committee ones with preset questions, and she's acing it, talks the big game. Excitedly describes her past projects and their impact. Seems all around pretty personable. Then we deviate a bit and start asking basic coding questions, and she replies with a line I will never forget as long as I shall live. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't really do coding. I have my Chinaman for that. 5 seconds of stunned silence. I beg your pardon. My Chinaman, let's call him Bob. If something needs doing, I pass it off to him, and it's just done. He's really good. When we inquired if we could maybe interview the Chinaman instead, she got really flustered and basically wound the interview down. It's like we committed a great offense by implying the two of them were separate entities. To this day, we don't really know what the deal there was exactly. TLDR, our applicant had a Chinaman personal coding slave or something. Story 32. I am sure I was the one who gave the worst answer. I was interviewing for American Apparel and just looking to get a basic job to get some money for college. The process seemed to be going well, and the manager even spoke to me immediately after I came to turn in my application. I felt pretty good about it, even if the clothing wasn't really my style. Unfortunately, she asked me, what celebrity do you aspire to dress like? I'm not a person who follows celebrities, and I certainly don't aspire to copy anyone else's look, add in the fact I was being homeschooled through high school, so I had no idea who was big. She was expecting me to say Bruno Mars, Jared Leto. He wasn't the Joker at the time. Chris Brown, or even Kanye West, but the only celebrity I could think of was a psychobilly artist named Kitty Casket. I didn't get the job, but did go outside and laugh for a solid 15 minutes, because even I instantly knew how absurd that situation was. Story 33 asked a question about conflict resolution. This very small person with a Napoleon complex responded with 2 physical altercation stories he had at work, both of which he initiated. He beat them up, though, and walked out. The thing that got me was he was chuckling through each story like I was supposed to be impressed with his fighting skills. Story 34, interviewing someone for a job as a bill collector, something that was crystal clear in the interview, not disguised as a customer service job. Her with a lot of emphasis, I just want a job where I can help people. Sorry, sweetheart. You wouldn't be doing that here. Story 35, I had a person interviewing for an operator position. As soon as they sat down, they looked directly at me and said, shouldn't you be in school or something? HR looked right at him and said, "She's the engineer on these manufacturing lines and will be your direct supervisor," they definitely didn't get the job. Story 36, I had an interview for the job of my dreams with a larger organization. So naturally, an HR representative sat in on the meeting. After describing the physical requirements of the position, the department head asked if I was comfortable meeting them daily. Without missing a beat, I energetically replied, "Well, that sounds terrific. I'd die if I worked in an office. Immediate regret." I struggled through the remainder of the interview. Afraid to look at the poor HR guy, I decided not to include a desperate apology in my thank you note to them, and went on to beat myself up about it for 2 weeks. Much to my surprise, they offered me the position anyway. I still get sheepish every time I see the HR rep around the workplace. We've never said a word about it, but he remembers me by name and is always pleasant. Cheers to you, HR guy, for overlooking my accidental disparagement of your daily life. Story 37 showed up to a formal office job interview in raggy jeans and a hoodie. "Sorry, I didn't dress up. I had school today, then dress up for school. And if asked why, you say you have a job interview later." Story 38, I was interviewing someone for a customer service position. "Tell me about a time you had to go out of your way to help a customer." I asked her. She gave me a 5-minute long answer about how she made sure that the customer respected her and how valuable her time was, and that sometimes you just have to put them in their place. They ask you all kinds of questions, but they just need to think, and then they know the answer. So I tell them to think for themselves, and then they get it. She didn't get a call back. Story 39, not a job interviewer, but I am an awkward guy and a serial job interview failure. I was once flip-the and called by my interviewer and abandoned in a service station. I was fresh out of uni and applying for every job under the sun. I read about a nondescript job in sales, which I now know to be a red flag, and applied. I was told I'd have a day-long interview at a location in the city center, but once ID turned up at the building, I was taken by my interviewer in a car to a service station on the motorway. The whole way there, she was giving me the hard sell, saying that she had only worked there 6 months, and it was already the best job she'd ever had, that she couldn't imagine her life without it, etc. Then it started getting weird. She was saying that she was just about to hit the threshold where she really started making money, saying that she was so excited to buy out her parents' mortgage in a few years' time. She was saying she went to a company conference last week and heard a speech by a guy who made his first $1 million last year after 3 years with the business. But next year he was anticipating a few million more than that. I get to the service station, and it's a job selling perfume in the concourse to passersby. No stall or anything either, just collaring people and selling them perfume. For context, I'm a gangly, awkward man in my early 20s. No woman on earth would buy perfume from me. She sits me down with pen and paper and starts the interview, which occurs in the form of 30-minute written pieces while she sells perfume. Part 1 lists all the important things in my life. Part 2 imagine how excess cash would help these goals. Part 3 list all the problems in my life. Part 4 imagine all the ways excess cash would fix them. She started describing Part 5, which was thinking about how good it would feel to retire early, but I stopped her and asked what the job was. She started to describe a sales system where you buy perfume and sell it for profit in the services, and over time you start to hire people under you to sell it for you, so that you can buy in larger quantities, obviously reaping more profit as you go. You don't get salary per se, and things start small, but eventually you'll have a network of people working for you, and yada yada yada. It gradually became apparent she was talking about a pyramid scheme. I asked her how much money she was making. She wouldn't give a number, but said not all that much yet. But that was because she was still building and hadn't yet reached the number of people under her to really start buying in bulk. Where the profit is, she started describing a pay scale that I can only describe as insane, calculating that I would be making my millions within the next few years. I didn't want to come off as rude, but I also didn't want this job or to spend all day in the services applying for it, and felt bad that she seemed to be getting ripped off, so I tried to describe the problems with pyramid schemes as politely as I could. I'm sure I came across as a condescending of the highest order, because she reacted as above and told me I could make my own way home, had to call a friend to come collect me. Story 40, a few years back we advertised for a job developing a cancer biomarker. We got an interesting CV from a guy that worked in DNA forensics. While the details were lacking, it was an interesting enough CV to get him in for an interview. Once there, and the pleasantries were out of the way, the interview went as such. Could you tell us a bit more about your work in forensics? What kind of techniques are you familiar with? I was a janitor. Story 41, I already posted one just before, but this one stuck out. Kid told me that he just got out of county for a possession charge and can't work certain times because he has a court-appointed inpatient rehab. He goes to plus probation, brutal honesty, refreshing. The look of relief on his face when I asked if he had a certain probation officer was great, especially after I told him that's who I have to go to every week. Hired him on the spot. Great worker, good kid, funny kid, I kind of became his unofficial sponsor, and he's doing great with his recovery, a true blade of grass in a lawn of weeds. That was 2 years ago. After a while, he told me he likes the kitchen work, but his real passion is auto mechanics. I put a word for him with a friend who's a mechanic. He's quickly moving up the ranks at his job at the shop. Edit, my gold cherry just got popped via tidy interviewing people to replace me as assistant manager of a teen girl clothing store. As I had stepped down and moved on to a different job, I stayed on as a temporary manager for 2 years afterwards, only to help train new employees and to jump in when they were short or had an emergency. First impression, older woman with way too much makeup on and a pantsuit. Question, how do you learn about fashion trends? Answer, my mom. She's 71 and so fashionable. She sells Mary Kay. So I always get to see the new Mary Kay magazines with the fashion trends before others do. Question, tell me why you're interested in management. Answer, well, at the yogurt place I work at, I'm the oldest employee there, so everyone asks me what to do there and I tell them. It makes my manager a little tense because she's the boss, but I can't help it if they ask me. Obviously did not hire her for a variety of reasons, not just these answers. The crazy part is I saw her working at a little corner shop close to my home not too long afterwards. She wasn't wearing any makeup and was in normal clothes. She almost looked like a different person, much younger looking without all of the makeup and pantsuit. She's a very nice woman, but she overshares. The first time I saw her working, she did not recognize me and was complaining about druggies applying to work with her. She didn't know they were on drugs, but they looked effed up, her exact words. She also told me the name of someone who bounced a check there and said he wanted a job too, but that she just trashed his application instead of turning it in to her manager. I also am close with some of the employees there since I've been frequenting the store for 10 years. And once she realized who I was and asked me to confirm, she started telling people she thinks I didn't choose her because I was intimidated by her experience. Story 42, I was once told I come in late often and then proceeded to tell me how she would have to come in late next week, even though she wasn't offered the position. To top it off, when HR told her she didn't get the job, she started leaving me messages asking if she got the job. It was pretty amazing. Story 43, not an employer, but the company I work for just hired on a chick who was pretty intense. During her interview, they asked her how she handled stress. Her reply was something about her watching her kid die in front of her about a year ago. They still hired her. Before she started working with us, our boss informed us of this as to try not and trigger her or anything. So she comes in and starts working with us and immediately starts talking about her dead son and how she's a hardcore conspiracy theorist. It was extremely uncomfortable. Story 44, this was me. I had to come back to my country a few years back to help my dad while my mom was dying. I signed on the dole when I got home. Part of the deal was I had to do X number of interviews a month. Obviously, with the situation, I wasn't interested in getting a job. For a few months, this was going well. I was applying for jobs I was nowhere near qualified for. In the rare event ID, get an interview ID answer questions really badly deliberately. Every month, I'd go back to the welfare officer and hand him my stack of applications. Job done, see you next month. Then I had an interview with a large telco for a solutions architect role. Thought it would go like the others, to be honest. I had some experience, but not enough to land a high-level position. They started asking me questions. So how do you understand what a customer is looking for? What methodologies would you use? Me, customers are usually idiots. They never know what they want. As long as they look good in front of their boss, they don't give a, them have you any experience building networks? Me, actually, yeah. When I was younger, I worked for a cowboy. I sold a medical facility, a managed network for $50K, but we didn't have the experience to do the job right, and my old boss ended up getting sued. I told him it would happen, but he just ignored me. This went on for over an hour. I was bored towards the end, so I started getting really short with them. Eventually, the interview ended, and I walked out the door thinking, yep, never hear from them again. About a week later, they call me back. Hi, Keck. We'd love to offer you the job. The package is a shitload of money plus commission. I said I didn't think I was the right fit. One of the guys who interviewed me called me a little later and said he really wanted me. I told him again I wasn't the right fit for the job. He said if I didn't accept the package, he'd report me to the dole office and I'd lose my welfare. He said he expected me to start in a month. I didn't know what to do, so I thought I'd better just go with it, and that I'd probably just end up being fired anyway. My mammy passed away a week before I was due to start. Old boss gave me an extra week to grieve. Went in and started the job. I was at first, but he never came down on me for it. Head just asked me what I'd learned from the experience and gave me pointers how to avoid it happening again. Eventually, I got the hang of it and became one of the most successful members of our team. I got really into it, started studying hard, and picked up a couple of industry awards for the team. 4 years later, I left that job for another decently high-paying role and haven't looked back since. I asked my old boss why he wanted me so badly. He said, son, I can teach you how to build a network. I can teach you how to scope a project and configure a router. What I can't teach is confidence, intelligence, and the right amount of not giving a. That's why I chose you. Edit, thanks for the gold, kind stranger. Story 45, I was a manager in a restaurant chain and did the hiring for a couple of years. I'm in my 20s and typically would interview people around my same age or younger, but on one occasion I interviewed a woman who was in her late 50s. She kept undermining me throughout the conversation with, "You're probably too young to remember this, and you're about the same age as my daughter." And when I was your age, sort of additions to her responses, that was her first strike. As the interview progressed, she mentioned she had been a GM for a popular fast food chain for 15 years, and I inquired how she felt about that experience. She started trashing the company, saying they let her go and never appreciated her work, calling the higher-ups all sorts of names. Second strike. Suddenly, and don't ask me why, she started quoting the film House Bunny, a movie about a former bunny who gets accepted into a sorority, and imitating Anna Faris lines in the film in the absolute weirdest voice possible. Third strike. As I'm beginning to wrap up the interview and dismiss her, she starts going on about how terrible her previous employer was for letting her go, and out of nowhere started sobbing, hysterically sobbing, emotional breakdown wailing. If the deal hadn't been sealed before then, it certainly was after that point. Story 46 asked an experienced 10-year software engineer about his previous roles. He told me his last couple of positions were jobs fit for a monkey, and actually did a good job of convincing me of that fact. There's no shortage of jobs for software engineers here. If you couldn't do better, there's probably a good reason. Story 47, I've posted this before, but here it is again. This guy was easily the worst interview I've done. He would ramble on for 5 to 10 minutes without really answering the question. Also, one of the questions I have to ask, tell me about a time you've had an upset customer. He started with, "I'm not racist," and ended up basically saying all black people are thieves. Story 48 had the following people apply for my company's software company. Trapeze artist, sheep sitter, certified chainsaw user. Best one was where the kid put down one of his attributes as bravery. Edit, these were all applications for college interns. Story 49, I think I have one that qualifies. When I was about 20 and applying to an agency for some call center work, I got a phone call from said agency while I was walking my dog. I said I was okay to talk, but partway through the conversation I got distracted by my dog, paying too much attention to the other dog I knew to be aggressive. So when she asked how many sick days did you take in your last job, I got stuck. I'd been through a particularly rough time with depression over the past year, and had taken the region of 20 to 30 days off in total. My previous boss was very understanding, including a bout of winter flu. At the same time, I half remembered being allowed 21 days off a year as holiday, not sickness, and after a brief pause, I blurted out, all of them. I immediately knew what I'd done, and had a hard time suppressing my laughter as she got for the rest of the call, ending with a "well, call you." It was literally the dumbest thing I've ever said. Oh, and they never did call back. Story 50, my boss is a console gamer PlayStation. At the end of an interview, he always asked the question PlayStation or Xbox. I remember one time the respondent said Xbox, and I replied with, "Oh, wrong answer." The guy was crushed. We explained it was just a joke, and we did hire him, but I still remember that end-of-the-world look on this poor guy's face. Story 51 was interviewing a candidate with a few coworkers. He was fresh out of college, and this was for a mechanical engineering position. Asked him to explain a time he had to troubleshoot an issue and how he fixed it. He starts telling us about a time that the front wheel on his car was squeaking and how he was going to figure out what was wrong. Gets about 2 minutes into describing his process, then Ayunat says, "Never mind, you wouldn't understand the issue," to a room full of engineers. Story 52, I am a female, and my then manager was male. This is important. The bloke in question refused to shake my hand when we first collected him from reception, but did shake my then manager's hand, slammed a door in my face. After holding it open for my then manager, directed all his answers to my then manager, even for the questions that I had asked him. Story 53, I was given a job opportunity one did not want as an internship at an accounting firm. They said this job will require regular drug testing. They said they'd call me back. When I responded I'd be more than happy to test drugs. This was a year ago, still waiting on that call. Story 54, I was once interviewing for a junior-level web designer. An applicant arrived for his interview, and I immediately felt bad because he was much older than I was, probably in his 50s and I was in my 20s, but applying for basically an entry-level position. He was fine during most of the interview, seemed to mostly know what he was talking about. Then I asked him about what some of his strategies were for improving page load speed. He replied, "Well, the thing is, if you look at how hex color codes work, black is free to send over the internet." I stopped him. "Black is free? What do you mean?" "Well, the color black is 0000000, and the codes go all the way up to FFFFFF. 0 basically means off, so you send fewer bytes for that. So make a page faster, You make more things black, huh? But what if I want to use purple? Well, that's easy. If you want to use purple but make the page a little faster, we can just use a darker purple until the page is faster. I ended the interview pretty quick after that. I felt embarrassed for him.